Okay, so today we're going to be discussing the wood element and the wood officials, and a lot of their correspondences and how they might show up in individual patients. So I trust that you guys have this book already, the 5-element book, right? Yep, very good. Yep. So, it's a very nice summary of understanding of the correspondences. There's some decent quotes from some of the classics. So it's good to read that. And then if you have Worsley's book, he certainly has a very poetic way of describing the elements and the officials, excuse me, which is definitely good to read eventually if you don't have the book already. I'm assuming that in CFEA 1, you guys already talked about a lot of the basic correspondences and resonances of the wood element, right? Color, sound, odor, emotion, all that. Okay, like the sensory organs and things like that. So we don't have to review that, right? You guys know that, yeah, okay. All right. So the point of really understanding the elements and the officials is basically twofold. And I think this really gets to what treatment is about and what I emphasize in my clinic, which is two things. One is that the patient's main complaints, chief complaints, are addressed, and the chi and blood are flowing better when they leave than when they come in. And that can happen in a variety of ways, and that's really what the whole curriculum is about, is how to do that. Like, how do we get, and for me, when the chi moves, the Shen is liberated to some degree, which means when the chi and blood are flowing like nature intended, their 5 Shen are just a little bit brighter. And which leads me to the second aspect of treatment, which I think separates a more mechanical approach to a more humanistic approach, which is how do we help the patient cultivate an observer to which they are able to make a connection between the things that they're coming in complaining about and what they do with their body and how they live in their mind. So these are all like the lifestyle factors, what they eat, how they eat, when they eat, how much they eat, their activity level, right? What they do with their bodies, the amount of rest they get, all these things, right? As well as what's their mindset as they move through life. And where do they lose Shen awareness? Well, that's when we're triggered, right? We all get triggered. We all get upset about something. We all kind of lose it to some degree. And that inhibits the smooth flow of chi and blood. And if that goes on for years, decades, that erodes the functioning of the organ systems. It interferes, it inhibits the flow of chi and blood through the channels. It diminishes the Shen and leads to symptoms. Now, I'm not saying that all symptoms are a result of some spirit or mind level disharmony, but I am saying that on a continuum from very much to just a little, there is some involvement with people's mindset and how they move through life, and are they aware of their triggers? Are they aware of where they lose presence and mindfulness? Because in those times, we're just a slave to our conditioning, and we're not really in charge, and we're not able to respond to the normal, authentic Zen chi that's constantly moving, constantly arising, that allows for more ease, right? And obviously, if that's happening, then they're able to experience and then give all of the gifts of the elements and experience all the gifts of the elements, even when times are tough. I'm not saying that they're going to be happy all the time, but I'm saying they're going to have a sense of choice and mastery and presence over their life that makes life a lot easier, okay? And doesn't erode the chi moving through their channels and then affecting the somatic changes, right? Leading to symptoms. Okay, does this make sense, right? So on one hand, you're poking them with sharp things, you're burning them with hot things, right? You're using needles and moxa and cupping and gua sha and all these other stuff to get the chi and blood flowing as nature intended, better when they leave than when they came in, which helps to liberate the Shen, which helps to amplify to whatever degree you want to be coaching your patients about, the foods they eat, the activities they engage in, as well as helping them cultivate an observer so they're not at the mercy of their conditioning and can experience the freedom and the more ease of their Zen Qi so they can respond to life more fully. All right. So all of their mindsets and reactions and thematic ways of being and the stories that these pathological lies that they tell themselves that get them upset and keep them upset, sort of can be, of course, as human beings, we love to organize things into types and categories, can have 5 different flavors, right? They can have the wood flavor, the fire flavor, the earth flavor, the metal flavor, the water flavor, right? And JR said, well, the insight you get into like the sort of the filter, the elemental filter through which they see life or perceive reality can be observed on the outside via the color around the eyes and the mouth and the sound quality of the voice and the odor and the emotional state. That is, what's the emotion that you feel most predominant in their presence, especially when they're in reaction. And so just like the pulse, just like the tongue, the CSOE gives us a little bit of insight of what's going on inside based on what's going on outside. All right, so the wood, as you know all those correspondences, right? The springtime and, it deals with the ligaments and the tendons, right? That which allows us to move with power and grace and coordination. It relates a lot to the chi in the blood, the smooth flow of chi in the blood. The movement is up and out, right? And opens through the eyes and deals with the nails, right? So we know all those basic things. So let's talk about, on a more subtle level, the movement of wood. Again, there's what a thing is, and then there's sort of what a thing is based on its relationship to other things, right? So each of you, for example, have your own identity, but you are in relationship to many things, right? You have maybe a romantic partner, maybe a child, right? Maybe you have kids, maybe you have parents, maybe you have siblings. Who you are is who you are, but then there's who you are in relationship to the cashier at the Trader Joe's, or who you are in relationship to someone suing you, or who you are in relationship to your patient, or who you are, in relationship to whatever, right? Your coworkers and so forth, right? So certain aspects of you emerge more obviously, in a more pronounced way when you're in relationship with other people. And so wood also needs to be seen in relationship, like what it is and the movements of what it is, but also in relationship to the other elements. So it doesn't just exist, right? It exists in relationship to the seasons. So it's it's the child of the water, which means something is moving out of the hidden abyss of the wintertime in an explosive way to break through that barrier between nothing and something, which can be metaphorically represented by the ground. So that seed sprouts, right? It germinates, it sprouts, but it's still hidden, but it's still growing. And then all of a sudden it explosively emerges into the visible world, the seen world. And then it's about, well, okay, it could grow anywhere, but where does it want to grow? It want to grows towards the fire. It want to grows towards the sun, towards the light. And so that implies a goal. So when you're in the presence of certain patient, with patients, you want to get a sense of like, what's their vibe, like the way they move through life. And everything is a continuum of yin and yang, right? And then out of balance, you've got excess, and out of balance, you've got deficiency. So you've got some people who grow like emerge explosively, but then they don't really know where to grow. They kind of grow everywhere, and they can't reach their goal, and that becomes frustrating. Or you've got some people who can't summon the chi to emerge, and so they remain dormant and stagnant, right? And that's also frustrating. So when you're with your patients, look at like, how do they move through life? Is it thematically have a lot to do with growth, evolution, getting better, improving, right? And and their movement towards a goal. Can they summon the chi to like move towards something and grow and be bigger and more than what they are currently? Or do they not really have that and they remain kind of stuck, right? This might show up as depression, right? They might feel lost, right? Again, thinking about the Hun, which really guides and informs every aspect of the wood element, every aspect of the liver and the gallbladder officials, because the Hun spirit allows us to see beyond the physical horizon and to see beyond the temporal horizon of what's happening in the moment to envision a future. There's a really nice quote on page 57 of the Hicks book. I think it's by Bernard Shaw, yeah. He says, the reasonable person adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Now, on one hand, that might sound like, well, like you shouldn't be unreasonable, you should just be reasonable. That would create more ease. But wood CFs are more about progress and movement towards a goal. And they're willing to be not at ease for a time in service of a goal. And oftentimes that goal will resonate with certain themes. One of those themes is a reward of growth, of reaching a new height, reaching a new depth, reaching a new further distance or greater height. And that could be determined by some kind of like benchmark, more money, the gold medal, a faster time, right? Winning in a competition. It's not really about the accolades so much. It's about a sense of achievement and a sense of development and putting forth that effort to reach that goal. And along the way, what is terribly important to a wood CF that is in balance, that is balanced, is fairness and equity. So when it's out of balance, there's a lack of benevolence. When it's out of balance, the Hun gets disturbed, and the goal that it sees that's beyond where the person is in time and space gets distorted. And this can show up as like by, whatever it takes, right? There's an old saying, by any means necessary. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the means, what is it? The means determine the end or something like that, or means, I can't remember what this, do you guys remember what the saying is? The means something, the end, like the means validate the ends. I can't remember the saying, but basically
the end determine the means.
Yes, right? So if you're willing to cheat and lie and to screw over someone else, right? That's a very out of balance wood CF, right? Wood CFs are generally more about reaching the goal, but reaching it fairly, because then the competition, because if you cheat, then the competition really is invalidated. Because, if we're all cheating, then there's no real sense of achievement. Like, what did you really achieve, right? It diminishes the virtue of achievement. right? Just like when we hear about, like in baseball, Mark McGuire and others who were using steroids, and it's like, great, well, that's great. So you use something that other people weren't using to achieve your ends. Why should I give you any accolades, right? So these are some of the main themes that show up in a lot of wood CFs. The ability to envision a future in terms of time and space, as well as a sense of development and growth, but that occurs, and those actions and that training and that the work that goes into that, applying your chi and blood to that end, must be infused with a sense of benevolence. Otherwise, they're out of balance. And then what you'll feel is a sense of aggression, competition that's sort of like aimed personally. They don't want to win, they want to beat you. And there's a difference, right? There's a difference between like wanting to be the best and wanting to demolish everyone else, to put everyone else in an inferior position, right? That's a distorted Hun. There's no benevolence there, right? I mean, you really look at it like a lot of elite athletes who play by the rules. There's a lot of mutual respect, and this is what makes a really like a good loser. You know what I mean? You can go and you go and you shake hands with the person that beat you, and you're like, good job, man, well done, right? It may suck and you may want to hit them over the head with a 2x4, but that's just the child part of you. They beat you fair and square, and it's like, all right, well, next time, because they love a challenge. A lot of wood CFs love a challenge. The best way to motivate a wood CF is to tell them, yeah, I don't really think you could do that. Yeah, I think the odds are stacked against you. I don't think you're going to do it. I don't think you can cut it. That's the best. They're going to go, I'll show you, right? And I'll show everybody. And again, it's not to like beat everybody down, but it's to elevate oneself beyond a challenge, right? So this is like, to go beyond your conditioned ideas about your limitations. So these are some of like the big themes that you'll see in people that resonate with the wood. So a desire for growth, a vision or a plan for the future that takes them to some greater place in both time and space, or personal development, a sense of fairness, a sense of like equality, right? That the rules should apply to everybody, right? And this is where, the unreasonable man or person like takes effective action, right? Because we're going to move forward. That's why a lot of activists are wood CFs, right? Because they want to create change. This brings us to the quality of wind, the climate of wind. So we're all familiar with wind and all its various forms, from hurricanes, tornadoes, gales, everything to like a nice breeze, right, at the beach. But wind is cleansing and brings about change. So another big theme is change. Because again, if you're going to go from here to there, something has to change, right? Things can't progress and move forward by staying the same. It's just natural law. Like every spring comes around, my fig tree is just a little bit bigger, right? And maybe there's like one more fig or two more figs on the tree, right? Every year to a certain point, a child gets a little taller. Every year the plant has another ring, right? The tree has another ring to it, right? So growth requires change. Change is uncomfortable. So change, though, like growth, has to occur at an appropriate timing and degree, right? Anybody have a growth spurt when you were young? Right? It's not comfortable. Your joints ache. I remember my feet grew really big, like I was short, but I had these like really like hobbit feet. It was it was ridiculous. And my knees were like so achy. In 1 year, in a year and a half, I grew almost like 6 inches. It was crazy. It was nuts. I was short, and then tall, right? It was just nuts, but it was uncomfortable. And similarly, change requires a different what? Perspective. So wood is all about perspective and perception. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk individually about the liver and the gallbladder specifically. So we all talk about the winds of change, and that's what wind represents on a psycho-emotional spirit level. There's some kind of powerful change. Now, every element has their relationship to change because every official, every channel has a wood point, right? So there's always like a mini resonance of the wood within every other official, within every other channel, because the official lives in the channel. The official lives in the channel, right? The organ system lives in the channel. That's why you affect the organ system by treating points on the channel. So if you're treating a wood point on any other channel, other than liver and gallbladder, you're stimulating the systemic resonance of wood, as well as the aspects of wood within that official. And one of those aspects is change, as well as all the other themes. So every official, every organ system has to grow, right? And by growth, I also mean by genetic mRNA replication, right? So our DNA continues, right? Because every cell, every organ system, every body part replaces itself and renews itself, like it's every certain period of time. And you can actually go online, you can say, okay, the bones are every 2.5 years, and the nervous system is every year, and so forth and so forth, right? So that quality of renewal, that quality of repair, which is in a way forgiveness. Like I was working really hard around the house. I got this big blister, like tore off some layers of skin, right? It was kind of painful and irritating, but it's healed over. In a way, that's my body forgiving me for not wearing gloves, right? Right? The body heals. That's a sense of forgiveness. That's benevolence. That's my body being benevolent. It didn't go, screw you, I'm not healing that scab, right? No, right? No, the body will repair and renew itself all the time, right? So, but it has a certain timing to it, and that timing is under the purview of the liver. So change, drastic change, is very disorienting. Just like an intense wind. If you've ever been exposed to like an intense wind, it's a little disorienting. Like for maybe like a few seconds, it's not so bad. But if you're under like an intense wind for a period of time, it's irritating. It really is. It's disorienting. It stirs things up, right? So it's hard to be clear about how to move forward with an erect posture and grace and power. It looks like my screen is freezing occasionally. Are you guys hearing me okay? All right. So wood folks love change. That's what they're talking about with the unreasonable man, all progress, right? So when somebody stands up and advocates for some kind of change that brings greater equality to the community, to the nation, to the world, anything that ends with blank rights, right? Civil rights, human rights, animal rights, gay rights, women's rights, whatever. That is a wood statement, right? And they're not wrongs, right? I'm advocating for women's wrongs. No, like no one does that. Right? So we're making things right. So this is another big theme that shows up is a lot of wood CFs, if they're very out of balance, will always think that they're right, even when they're not right. And they will fight to the death for their right to be right. Or in the face of any kind of obstacle or challenge, they collapse. The tree is not able to have strong roots, i.e. principles, values, goals, and are easily toppled, right? Whoever said you can't fight City Hall was either any other CF other than wood or a very blood deficient wood CF, right? You know, that whole bloodied but unbowed, you know, like that there's a great poem called Invictus. I definitely recommend you reading that. That's sort of a water moving into wood and maturing wood poem. It's called Invictus. It's an amazing poem. So anybody that like stands up, right? I mean, and change can be really painful, especially change that's based on perceptions, right? So, you know, right, like all the activism that occurred in the 60s, it was very disruptive. And people who had been kept down, right, were depressed, whose rights were, excuse me, suppressed, they were kept down, right? Were not able to be themselves in the world freely. That frustration, that anger built up to a head, and the next thing you know, you have uprisings, you have violence, you have destruction, you have conflict, right? And you have a lot of like unreasonable people taking to the streets for certain rights. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of this or that. I'm just looking at all of this through the lens of the movement of Qi that is financed by blood. Blood is the material matrix of your consciousness. It's literally a solvent for Qi and Shen. It's literally a solvent for Qi and Shen. It's a Qi and Shen delivery device that sends your Shen and Qi to every cell in your body where the blood innervates. Now, what's interesting, does anyone know the parts of the body that are least vascularized? That is, where it's hardest for the blood to flow.
I would guess like fingertips and toes. No.
Nope. No, I mean, squeeze your fingertips.
Yeah.
How fast does it refill, right? Yeah, it refills pretty quick. Now, I get what you're saying, because that's the furthest extremity. So they are the first in the preservation of the body where they'll say, well, okay, I'd rather my blood go to my liver than my fingertips, right? That's why peripheral neuropathy or neuropathy starts at the extreme extremities. So you're right about that, where in terms of like, if the body has limited resources, it'll focus more on the core and the center than the extremity. But it's actually the bones, the ligaments, and the tendons. The bones and the ligaments and the tendons are the least vascularized aspects of the body, which is kind of ironic because the ligaments and the tendons are under the purview of the liver, which and the gallbladder to some extent, right? Which is in charge of managing the blood, right? Being at the right place at the right time. This is why the liver figures so heavily in menstrual disorders and menstrual issues, or just the menstrual cycle, because it should occur at a certain time with a certain amount, with a certain quality of flow, right? So the liver and the gallbladder, the wood, likes to flow with ease and freedom. the quintessential liver cheese stagnation formula, Xiaoyaosan, which is horribly translated as rambling powder. But that's like the free and easy wanderer powder, the relaxed wanderer powder, this sense of strolling, I'm carefree, I'm moving, I'm going towards a goal, but it's coordinated, it's elegant, right? It's smooth. So wood CFs want to be able to move through life unencumbered, but with challenges of their own choice, right? Anybody that does sports, or Melvin, you were in the military, you know, like, you know, there's training towards an end, right? It's not just like, hey, today we're just gonna like work out. No, you're gonna work out towards some kind of goal, to meet some kind of strength training goal or ability. Remember, again, it's fed by the water, which is about the creation of power. Skill and ability stem from it. How does skill and ability stem from it? By moving into the wood, where we can then activate our chi in the blood towards a certain goal, right? Which allows us to experience a sense of transcendence and achievement and completion, right? So there's always a purpose. So out of balance wood CFs lack purpose, lack goals, lack vision, lack a sense of ease, an inability to grow, an inability to deal with conflict or obstacles, right? Or on the flip side, they're addicted to all of that, and they kind of become like a solution in search of a problem, right? Like these are the people that seem to generate conflict out of everything. Like I had this one friend, I mean, like we'd just be like in the drive-through at McDonald's, and he'd end up getting in an argument with the person on the end of the microphone. I'm like, what the hell? He just was so addicted to conflict. I just had to eventually cut him loose because I was just tired of getting in so many fights. You know, to save him, because he couldn't fight for anything. It was just awful. So it was terrible. We were always getting our asses kicked. So I was like, no, like some people, they're just addicted to conflict, emotional conflict, physical conflict, you know, because they're right. Because they're right, everyone else is wrong. My vision, my perception is correct. Your vision, your perception is incorrect. And so you'll feel that sort of aggressiveness, right? As opposed to passive aggressiveness. A lot of wood CFs out of balance are aggressively aggressive. It's not passive aggressive. It's aggressive aggressive, you know? So, and interestingly enough, this quality of ease and aggression, passivity and timidity, versus like aggression and someone sort of moving in and encroaching upon your space, right? So out of balance, I'm not taking up my space, and I'm allowing you to actually encroach and take over my space. This would be like your doormat kind of person, right? You step on their foot and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. You know, I didn't mean to get in your way, right? Or on the flip side, they're busy taking up everyone else's space because they feel hemmed in. They feel constrained. They feel limited by these, you know, and again, fire sedates wood. This propriety. Well, I don't give a darn about what you think is appropriate. You're not going to stop my growth. So these are people that like go beyond norms in really obnoxious, haughty, aggressive ways, right? And you can see this with like a lot of people who are in the public eye. There's certain people that they thrive on conflict. No one's going to tell them what to do. The norms and rules and laws don't apply to them. It's just not, because it's not fair. And then what will happen is the way that they skillfully manipulate is to then proclaim they're a victim. If you really look at people who are constantly talking about being victims, if you really look carefully at their behavior and their relationships, they're generally victimizing other people. They're generally oppressing other people. Right? Like, how dare you get into my way? Like, I should be able to run roughshod over everything and violate all the rules and rights of everyone else because I need my space to feel free. Because again, everything is this sort of zero-sum game. There's a winner and there's a loser. Right? Now, some people are addicted to being losers because they identify as victims, and some people are addicted to being winners. And again, thinking about what feeds into Wood, if that movement is too abrupt, you'll see people getting aggressive because they have a lot of disowned fear. Fear is what makes people aggressive. I'm not comfortable staying in this. I'm going to move up into this. Right? I'm going to attack you before you attack me. That's not a statement by someone who's blood rich. Blood allows us to take the blows of life with comfort and grace. Right? Any of you have ever played sports, or you have some kind of physical contest where there's some kind of contact, or emotionally, right? Like, or psychologically, like, like quiz shows, you know, or even like the Price is Right. I mean, you've got contestants that are competing against each other. And it's not like, well, if this person outbids that person, they get it right, the other person goes and like punches them in the head. Right? You're like, oh, it's a game. So what allows people to be in competition with benevolence and to lose with grace is perspective, a larger perspective. We can put things in perspective. Somebody bumps into me by mistake at the grocery store. If I'm making a federal case out of it, and I feel my space has been violated, and I take it because Wood takes things very personally, and you've victimized me, and it's unfair, and you're not paying attention, and you're wrong, and I'm right. Like, that is a sign of blood deficiency and chi stagnation, right? If someone, you know, like somebody bumps into you and they go, oh, my bad, I'm sorry. And you're, hey, no problem, man. I mean, you could actually end up becoming good friends because Wood is on its way to fire, right? So this is why, like, conflict actually may be the first step in connection, partnership, and intimacy. I'll give you a brief example. Long time ago, like 22 years ago, I was sitting at this lunch table. I was at this spiritual healing school in California, and this woman sat down across from me at, like, we're all in this sort of like lunchroom kind of area, you know, and she said something and I kind of got rankled by it. And so I said something back and she got rankled by it. And then we ended up getting into this huge argument, like at a spiritual healing school. Because, like, you know, like, I don't generally back down. She doesn't back down, you know, like we were kind of like going at it. And then it got kind of loud. And it was really funny. Like, and the people that were sitting next to us were kind of like sinking under the table. It was really uncomfortable. And 2 months later, I asked her to marry me. Because it was like, oh my God, like, we found somebody that can, like, meet me. It was really interesting. So, you know, I think about, like, most of the best friends that I've ever had in my life were people that I got into these, like, weird arguments with when we first met. So conflict can breed intimacy and connection, right? Because there needs to be this sense of respect, because eventually you can kind of open and really see this opponent and get a sense of their perspective, right? Because this opens to the eyes, right? We all have a literal blind spot On the back of our eyes is the retina. And where the retinal nerve, like let's say, okay, so here's the back of the eye, right? Here's the front, like facing out, like, and then the eyeballs in here. But coming in through the back is the retinal nerve, or the optic nerve, excuse me, the optic nerve. So where the optic nerve meets the back of the retina, there's no rods or cones. There's no cells that allow us to perceive light. So we have a literal blind spot. And you can like punch, like take like a hole punch out a little hole, color it red, hold it with a pair of tweezers, and just move it around. And somewhere around like 2 o'clock, level with your eye, it will disappear. If you're looking straight ahead and you're just looking with your peripheral vision, it'll just disappear because there's no rods or cones there. We all literally have a blind spot, which requires us to move our head, to change our perspective, to see the whole picture. I believe our entire physical creation is a metaphor for how the mind and the spirit work. So if you don't know you have a blind spot, right, you can't be right all the time. It's very humbling. I have to learn what other people's perspectives are to get the whole picture, right? We all have heard that story about, like, you know, the 5 people feeling the elephant. There were 5 blind people feeling the elephant. Has anyone not heard that story? Like, raise your hand if you haven't heard the story. You've all heard the story, okay. So there's a story about like this 5 blind people, and they come across this giant thing, and they're feeling, one person what they're feeling is an elephant. One person feels the trunk, one person feels the tail, one person feels like the leg, one person feels the ears, right? One person feels like part of the body. And they're like, oh, it's like a giant snake. Oh, it's like a sturdy tree. Oh, it's like this wispy vine. Oh, it's like, you know, this giant fan. Oh, it's like this huge boulder. No, it's an elephant, right? So they only get like a small piece of the picture. And this is what like really pisses Wood CFs off, is they don't have the whole picture. They think they have the whole picture. So it's like talking to like a 12 to 14-year-old, right? They're just, I mean, they are so right and everyone else is an idiot, right? They're absolutely like, this is the way I see, but they don't know the whole picture yet. They don't know how life works. They've never been responsible for anything. They don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? But they know part of what they're talking about, right? So this desire to grow, this desire to evolve, to be greater, to go farther, right? Which requires a certain appropriate pacing, right? You can't overtrain, right? Or you damage yourself, you damage the tendons and ligaments, right? This is why I love CrossFit. People are like, why do you love CrossFit? I'm like, oh, it's why I bought my car with cash. Treating CrossFitters. Oh my God, right? So these are like some of the major themes with the people that resonate a lot with the wood, right? Any questions about all of that? Hopefully I'm starting to paint a little bit of a picture for you. Does anybody get treated on wood? Any of the 3 of you get treated on wood? No?
I'm
Well,
not.
Jane. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, right?
Go ahead, Guangxi.
Oh, thank you, Times. What you described this wood, the CF, is I really get it, feel it, because I got someone in my life like that, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Exactly. So as you bring up so dynamic and so true, everything.
Yeah. Because the older I get, the more I see that like every flaw is some undeveloped virtue. Even if the flaw is really abhorrent, even if the flaw is like in all respectable measures like bad, it's always rooted in some virtue. It just, this movement of the Zenshi as it arises, just as like the plant arises out of the abyss of the ground from the seed and emerges into the world, it goes through this barrier, and this barrier is our mind. And the mind either allows it to move in a natural, wholesome way, or it distorts it and twists it, and it comes out in an unnatural, unwholesome way. The wholesome way will always be constructive and add to and contribute to our vitality. The unwholesome way will always be destructive and erode our vitality. So that might be addictions, right? Like someone I know like was a heroin addict, and he really was looking at like what this was about for him and what was driving this addiction. And it was a desire for freedom, a sense of freedom in their body, right? That's not a bad thing, but you know, doing heroin 8 times a day, not very constructive, right? So, but it's always rooted in some positive virtue that's trying to arise, even when it's like unwholesome or even illegal or illicit. It's always rooted in some virtue. This is why you have, and we'll take a break in about 3 minutes. This is why you have a really unique, you're in a unique position to give something that people almost never experience in their lives, which is the potential for total acceptance. And all of the gifts of the 5 elements, starting with deep listening, benevolence and acceptance, a sense of partnership, sympathy and caring, you know, thoughtfulness and respect and acknowledgement for who and for the beauty of who someone is, even in the midst of really abhorrent behavior, which again, everybody should be held accountable. I'm not saying that violations of rules and norms should not be held accountable. People need to be held accountable. That's how you move forward, actually, right? That's what the medal is for, right? You take your, you know, for the lack of a better word, you take your punishment, and then that allows you, but if you really accept it, and then you can move on, right? I acknowledge I made these mistakes. I acknowledge I've done these things. I'm going to take my, you know, accountability like an adult, and then move on. Because if we stay avoiding of this, we can't move through the cycle. We stay stuck. And this is what festers, right? And becomes disease. So, but you're in a unique position to offer benevolence. And I think originally this was sort of like the intention of confession. Like I was raised Roman Catholic. So not to religify the conversation, but to use this as an example, because I just can't think of a lot of other examples. You know, you go into confession where actually the person's not even looking at you in the eye, right? You're looking at them, but they're looking over there. So they're just listening. They're not judging you. They're just listening, right? That's a receptive quality. So they're not confronting you, right? That's that in a way that's safer, right? If you're not like up in somebody's face and looking at them in the eyes, it's easier, right? I mean, if you have to like come clean to somebody, like, isn't it easier if they're just kind of like looking off to the side and just listening to you rather than like confronting you, right? So, and then you kind of bare your soul, you admit these things that we suppress, keep under the surface, right? We keep buried, right? But allow them to come out and move, that chi to move, right? Which courses the chi. Now I can move towards the sun, right? This all forgiving light of Shen. I can bring it to the light of awareness. And then allows me to kind of complete the cycle of it, right? Like, oh, you know, because we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes, right? So how do we move forward? By the first step is listening. And then the next step is applying benevolence and acceptance, and then creating a plan to move forward. How do you rectify this mistake? How do you rectify this air quotes sin, this mistake? So again, not to make it about confession, but to use as an example of how certain cultures create this system or context to keep the chi from stagnating and being stuck and suppressed, right? Because if you look at people with depression, okay, so me thinking, so I'm going to use me as the example. So me thinking about my patients who've come in for depression, almost all of them to a person are depressed, not just because of, but what shows up in these people is they've judged themselves into oblivion. They've just, they have no self-acceptance. They've eroded their own self-esteem because they think they're bad or they're powerless, right? Or they're just so loaded with mistakes, or life has so many obstacles and I don't have what it takes to meet and move through these obstacles or around them or transcend these obstacles. So then I kind of collapse. And a lot of what's involved in that collapse, what's folded into that, in addition to not being able to deal with all the obstacles, for one to just really be themselves and grow into the person they want to be, or to experience life as they want it, is this sense of like an overabundance of flaws. They've judged themselves and they've kept this score. And now the scorecard is like way in favor of like the mistakes. Like, these are the things I've done right. These are the things that I've done wrong. And it way tremendously outweighs all the things I've done right. So they have very low self-esteem. And that is moderated by the blood. So when you're dealing with depression, you move the chi and nourish the blood. All right. Any questions about that? We'll take a break till like, what do you say? Like 10 after? Is that cool? 10 after 10? All right. Anytime you're looking at the officials, you really want to make sure you have a good understanding of where the channel goes. So like in Deadman, you guys have that book yet? Deadman book for point location and stuff? Yeah. So, you know, you've got, I don't know if it shows up. Yeah. Right. They've got at the beginning of every section on the channels, it shows you where the primary channel goes. It shows you where the divergent and sinew and low vessels go. If you really have a good understanding of the channels, you have an understanding of the relationships the channel has with other organ systems and body areas. You have a sense of like what the liver is responsible for and how it carries out those functions via the points on the channel, right? So we know that the liver channel also goes to the lungs. We know it goes around the stomach. We know it goes through the gallbladder, right? Up the medial side of the leg, it wraps around the genital region, right? So these are all and then it also goes up through the throat and the neck, around the nose area. It goes through the eye, up through the brain, right? Up to the top of the head. So make sure when you're learning about the officials, also remember that the channel carries out the functions of the officials. So it's really good to know where the channel goes. All right. So the liver, sort of on a body, mind, spirit level, largely has a lot to do with the smooth flow of things and the timing of things. So especially the smooth flow of chi and blood and the timing. So when they say it stores and regulates the blood, what they're talking about is in a way very similar to what the gallbladder does with the bile. It holds something in a certain place, and then it allows it to move at a certain timing, right? Just like the gallbladder as an extraordinary food, and we'll get into this in a bit, it stores the bile. And then when you eat something that has fat in it, that then it's like, okay, now it, like the tiger, it pounces, right? It's been waiting, it's waiting, and now it pounces and it emits the bile into the small intestine, to the duodenum, right? So that's what they means by regulates, like stores and regulates. It means it holds it in a certain area until time in which it needs to be activated, right? And so this is a theme with the wood in general, right? There's a sense of like waiting, not stagnation, but just waiting for the proper time to move. And then there's rest, and there's a proper time to not move, right? We go to sleep, and then a proper time to move again. I mean, this in a way is sort of like represented by bamboo, right? There's the smooth, striated parts of the bamboo, and then there's the knot, which represents like the obstacles in life, right? Time where you have to kind of like, your movement, your progress is slowed down, right? Requires some effort, and then you can shoot up again, right? And then you hit some other challenge that's like, okay, now my progress is slowed down, maybe blocked for some period of time, and then I work through that, and then I shoot through again. Ironically enough, the bamboo is only really as strong as the knots are stable, right? The striated center part of the bamboo, right? That's incredibly strong. But the weak points are at the knots. So in a way, the integrity of the bamboo is defined by the strength and integrity of the knots. And in a way, the strength and integrity of the person is defined by the obstacles that they've faced and moved through, right? In a way that contributes to your identity. And wood is all about identity. Wood takes everything very personally, especially the liver. People that relate to the liver, they take things very personally. And we are sort of defined by our challenges, our sufferings, the things that were hard to deal with, the things that we had to struggle against and overcome with the help of the Zhur will, right? Because that's what tonifies the wood. What tonifies the spirit of the Hun, the ability to move forward, is a sense of will, right? This ability to persevere, right? this inner power, this inner strength, right? This grit. So everything is about the smooth flow, right? And that is on a physical level moderated by the sinews as well as the muscles. And on the mind level, this gives us, the blood is said to nourish the eyes so we can see, so we can attain perspective. It also moderates, again, the timing and the smooth movement of things. So on a mental emotional level, that's the ability to generate and activate plans, right? Because a plan is based on an assessment of circumstances. Remember, the liver is the general of the armed forces, right? It holds the office of the general of the armed forces. Assessment of circumstances and conception of plans stem from it. So this means that the liver is in charge of being able to physically see what's going on around you with the help of the gallbladder, which allows it to see not just what's right in front of it, but what's laterally to the sides, right? And then based on, okay, this is my understanding of what's happening, right? Now I know I know the best course to move towards my goal, right? So just like if you're driving to California, from Columbia or Baltimore or DC, right? You, at some point, you want to assess what's the nature of your car or your vehicle, or, well, my vehicle is not so great. Maybe it's better I take a train, or, well, you know what, actually my circumstances require me to be in California tomorrow, so I should fly, right? I have to be able to assess the situation in order to generate a plan, and then the gallbladder then takes over and then manages all the many details and decisions that are involved in putting the plan into action, right? So on the body level, the liver uses the qi in the blood to finance its assessment of circumstances and conception of plans. It uses the qi in the blood that must be moving smoothly, that must be flowing smoothly, and flowing smoothly in the right place at the right time, right? Like if you're, like we're in the midst of like, you know, building an apartment in our basement for my mother. I have to, so we've got like the architect, you know, to generate the plans. And then we've got the general contractor to put those plans into action. But guess what? I need permits, right? The architect doesn't generate the permits. The general contractor doesn't generate the permits. Someone else generates the permits. So I could just say, screw it. I'm just going to go ahead and build what I want. Wait for the permits later. That's not proper timing. Now, since there's one person in all of Howard County that handles all the plumbing permits, one person with their assistant, I have to wait, and I have to wait some more, and I have to wait some more, and then I have to wait some more, and now I'm feeling frustrated. But I'm not going to drive over to the planner's office and, you know, grab them by the collar and threaten them, right? I mean, that's inappropriate aggression, right? I have to wait. But waiting is not really, was not part of my plan. I mean, some waiting, but waiting 2 months wasn't part of my plan. Right? That's not fair, right? So this is how like wood deals with this. Like, I've got this plan, I've got all the materials, I've got all my blood and chi in my garage, like waiting and waiting and waiting. And that's chi stagnation. And then if that lasts long enough, it becomes so chronic, then it affects the blood. Now the blood starts to, because remember, chi is the commander of blood. Blood is the mother of chi. So all the organs that are, you know, nourished by the blood help, the blood nourishes all the organs that create the chi. And then the chi like moves, is sort of the activating force that moves and empowers the circulation of the blood. Now everything is stagnating. And now, you know, I've got like pain, right? When chi and blood are not flowing smoothly, there's pain, physical pain, but emotional pain, right? My plans are thwarted. I have these unfair obstacles. Now I'm experiencing emotional pain and discomfort. I want to course my chi, so the movements of frustration empower the movement of anger to move up and out. And now there's an object, there's a target towards my upset, right? And that would be like, you know, an enemy, a opponent, right? There's a focus to my anger. Now, there's healthy anger, and then there's unhealthy anger. So on a mental emotional level, we need anger, right? That is the motive force to thrust and penetrate into the unknown future, right? But there's also unhealthy anger, and that would be the character Nu, which shows a female slave being pushed down by the hand of a male master over the character for the heart. So with anger, again, there's physiological anger and pathological anger. Pathological anger, and again, there's some anger is appropriate, right? If you are being oppressed, if you are that, you know, female that's like under the, if you are that person under the hand of power pressing you down so you can't move up and out, over time you feel that in your heart. The heart is the organ that feels all the emotions, right? You know, the other emotions don't feel the emotions. I mean, the other organ systems don't feel the emotions. The other organ systems generate the chi that allows the heart to feel all of the emotions. So now it's like affected your Shen. Like the level of oppression has reached a certain point where now you feel it, it's painful, and now it provokes this desire to push back, right? To not be oppressed, to stand up for yourself, to push back against this oppressing force. But again, in a healthy way, this is what allows us to move forward in life, to right wrongs, right? To bring justice and equality to all situations, both big and small, in every kind of dynamic. But it always requires, and then even if the dynamic is with yourself, maybe you're struggling with some part of you that keeps you down. So on a physical level, this could be an addiction, a compulsion. On a mental emotional level, it could be a conditioned way of thinking. Like maybe we're raised in a certain family or culture that says, you know, these people should be this way, these people should be that way, you know, I should be this way, I should not be that way, right? But my inner authentic nature is not in alignment with that. You know, this is why a lot of a desire for order and organization, which is a natural tendency of the wood working with the fire, you know, to organize, to bring clarity of purpose, right? Everybody has a role, right? This would be like the organization chart, right? You know, this person in this position has these defined roles. This person in this division has these defined roles, and so forth. And it might be like even on a Confucian level on the family. I'm the oldest son, and then the second oldest son has these roles and responsibilities, and same with the women in their birth order, right? But at some point, it's natural law that some piece of that puzzle is not going to fit, because there are no grids or perfect squares, right? Or straight lines in nature. As organized as nature is, there's always a little element of, it doesn't quite, there's always that exception. It doesn't quite fit, right? So chances are, if you're at acupuncture school, you probably were the purple sheep in your family, right? I mean, unless I don't know, you know, maybe like your parents were acupuncturists and their parents were acupuncturists and their parents were acupuncturists, not in my family, right? So, but there's always going to be people who conform, and there's always going to be people who don't conform. And the people that conform don't understand the people that can't conform, and the people that can't conform don't understand the people that have a desire to conform. So there's always this dynamic that can either be disharmonious conflict or harmonious conflict, right? So that conflict may even be with yourself. Like, I have this tendency, I was taught to behave this way, to be this way, to be this, to have this purpose in life. I mean, I have so many acquaintances who were raised, you know, by parents from different cultures who basically said to them, you know, as teenagers, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or these two other things, and that's it. That's your choice. And, you know, artist, painter was not one of them. And the person's like, screw you, man, I'm out of here. I'm gonna be an artist, and you want to cut me off, you cut me off, that's fine. You don't want to talk to me anymore, that's not what I want, but I'm an artist. Right? So there's always this sense of like conflict, even if it's with yourself, because that is what stimulates growth, is conflict, right? I remember this Bob Duggan, who was kind of a mentor, he said to me one day, all chi is sexual. And I was like, because he would occasionally like go through this long train of thought in his head, and then he would just kind of pop out this Zen koan at the end. And I'm like, what do you mean all chi is sexual? He's like, well, it's yin and yang interpenetrating each other, and then what emerges is chi. I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, and that's sort of how life shows up, right? there's these two forces that come together to create something unique. And the growth and development of that has kind of a quality of a thrusting, right? It's up thrusting, up moving. It can be violent, it can be smooth. But there's always this desire for growth that requires some measure of conflict, even if I'm competing against myself, like for my own personal best, right? And there's a lot of drama in that. I mean, no great movie was ever made by showing someone quietly meditating on a cushion for an hour and a half with a peaceful look on their face. I mean, that's not compelling. That would not be a compelling movie, right? Oh, look how content they are. There's right. That's not really entertaining. So we like drama. And so, because I think that drama is a reflection of this place inside of all of us to some degree, whether a Wood CF or not, that realizes growth requires conflict. Growth requires me against something else, even if that something else is some other part of me, right? There's the part of me that wants to just lay in bed and just relax and read a book. And then there's the other part of me that says, I've got to get up and go like work out or take a walk or study, right? So there's a part of us that wants to just kind of be resigned and be like kind of stagnant and like keep things the same. And then there's a part of us that wants something to change. And really all change requires some measure of discomfort, because growth is not always, as my one Taoist friend said, healing is a bitch. Yeah. So on a mental level, there's some part of us that's like looking at the past, because again, the liver is in charge of timing. And with the spleen, working with the spleen across the co-cycle, the spleen banks the blood. The spleen contains and holds things in place. So when that blood infused with the Shen is held in a certain place, that's a memory. So you can even either be in a smooth, healthy relationship with your past, or you can be in an unsmooth, stagnating, unhealthy relationship with your past. An unhealthy relationship would be, I'm not even going to think about it, forget it, it's over, it's done. I'm not going to learn from my mistakes because I'm not even going to look at the past. Or you could be like, I dwell on the past and all the mistakes, and then I feel a sense of identification, which defines my identity. So I'm defined by my past mistakes, and therefore that erodes my self-esteem. So this is a lack of Shen awareness. This is like an inappropriate focus of Shen awareness that's stagnant, right? So this is moving too freely, which is exuberant, right? And growth becomes unchecked and not smooth. And this is like growth doesn't happen because I can't get past my past. I'm stuck in my past, right? So coursing the chi and the blood means facing the past, right? That's what the eyes are for. And then the inner eyes, like looking at our past, assessing those past circumstances, and only judging our past based on the circumstances of the past. Because, like say hindsight is 20/20. So for people who beat themselves up for making mistakes in the past, I'm like, yeah, but you didn't know then what you know now. When you were assessing the circumstances of 10 years ago, you didn't have this perspective. You had that perspective, and it was limited, right? It's like getting mad at a 6-year-old for being a 6-year-old. Well, how come you didn't behave like a 14-year-old? Because you're 6, right? And it's the same way. But once we become adults, we just blow all that out the window, right? Somebody sent me this really funny, those little memes that people send you on Facebook, and this is just a bunch of words, and it says, If you can't look back at your 17-year-old self and realize you were an idiot, you're probably still an idiot. Right? Because the person's perspective hasn't grown. Like I went to a class reunion against my better judgment because all the people that I was close to weren't able to go. I went to this high school reunion. Oh my God. Like the only people there were like the people that I didn't really hang out with or didn't get along with. And there was this group of like 6 guys that like continued to hang out with each other. And they were still behaving like 17, 18-year-olds. It was just so bizarre. It was just so sad. It's like, okay, you know. So there's a part of us that says those were the good old days. I cling to when I was young and my sap was full and, you know, I was flexible and I was the best shape of my life and, you know, I was popular and all that stuff, right? So, you know, if you stay stuck in these glory days, you can't grow, your perspective can't expand, and you remain really stuck. You're stuck in the past. So you're not really getting actually the benefits of the present moment or the future because you're staying stuck. So there's people that want to stay in the past, you know, especially like in a lot of political movements, they kind of want to take us back to like the 50s and the Eisenhower era. Right. And then there's some people that are like, screw that, you know, like I want my AI and, you know, like, right. They're like, you know, I want my rights and freedoms and, you know, like people that want to like push the boundaries, right? That's why teenagers are so obnoxious because they're constantly pushing the boundaries because that's their job. That's their purpose, right? So on a mental emotional level, that's what you see a lot. People pushing boundaries, expanding rules to make space so they can feel them course their own chi so they can have the space and the freedom to be themselves, unhindered, unoppressed, right? Because that oppression, that's frustrating. Like we fight against the man, you know, right? Like because something is keeping us down. And sometimes the man is keeping us down and we need to push back, right? Which requires some conflict. But then again, like, is this conflict infused with benevolence, which is not just the ability to see the other person's perspective, but the willingness to see the other person's perspective. Anybody can see the other person's perspective. Now, you'll see a lot of people who are really emotionally undeveloped, who are still sort of at this like teenage to preteen stage of emotional development. You'll get this sense, or they might explicitly say it, where to even question their beliefs, to even see something, to even bother being willing to see something from another perspective, from the opponent's perspective, is personally invalidating. They take it as a personal invalidation. And this is when people say, well, if you're willing to entertain the perspective of the other side or the other person's arguments, that means I'm immediately agreeing with them or promoting them. And that's an old tactic of debate, where it keeps people being right. I'm not even willing to entertain the willingness to see something from the other person's perspective, to hear the other person's argument, to see things from the way they're seeing them, to stand in their shoes and look through the world through their eyes, because to do that would be invalidating my personal perspective, because again, Wood's all about the personal. And that would mean, to invalidate would mean they win, I lose, right? Because I'm invalidating my perspective, therefore I'm not right. So they say, oh, just looking at from things from the other person's point of view is promoting that point of view, but it's not, right? And this is why it's so important when you're dealing with people in some stage of growth, whether they're children or teenagers or adults and your patients going through a challenging situation, is to do everything you can to sort of see their point of view and see the situation through their eyes. Because if you can't do that, you won't attain rapport. You're just another person in their way, creating another obstacle for them. This is not meaning you have to agree with it. Does not mean you have to promote it. Does not mean you have to not believe what you believe or know what you know, but you have to really be willing to walk a mile in their shoes. You have to be able to see their point of view and really get where they're coming from. What is the soil that is stimulating their growth in this moment? And that's the highest aspect of the liver mind, because it takes blood and self-esteem to do that. If you are blood deficient, you will be lacking self-esteem, and then you're lacking the willingness to see things from another perspective, point of view, and that's benevolence. So it's very important for liver folk to do everything they can to nourish their blood and to support the smooth flow of qi in that blood. That is paramount, absolutely paramount. All right. I'm just going to read you this quote from some notes that I have from another class. So benevolence, the character depicts a person and then the number 2. Ren benevolence, benevolence is Ren. Ren benevolence in the context of the virtue associated with the wood element may represent the understanding that one is never alone, right? No person is an island. We are constantly in relationship to other people and things, so we must act humanely. That is, be willing to restrain the impulse to always act in our own interests to further our own goals and act altruistically. Confucius also defined Ren in the following way, quote, wishing to be established himself, and again, I'm using the male gender because was the perspective of the time, that's the way they spoke. Wishing to be established himself, he seeks also to establish others. Wishing to be enlarged himself, he seeks also to enlarge others. This is from the Analects, 630. And I think about this as the capacity to yield without effort, without restraining our chi. That's the flexibility. Flexibility is empowered by blood, and flexibility with power is blood affected by chi, right? Supported by chi. So are you seeing how like things kind of like go together? The hun requires the smooth flow of chi and blood. The smooth flow of chi and blood is ensured by the richness of chi and blood. All right. Because without it, we're not flexible. All right. Okay. One last thing about the liver before we get into the gallbladder is in order to have a plan, and then on a sort of an ontological level, on an existential level, that's our purpose in life, right? And how that purpose unfolds is our destiny, right? That's the Shen, right? The Shen, the heart Shen. You have to be attuned to your own completely unique nature, which implies creativity. The most creative thing you can do is to be yourself. Why? There's no one else like you. There's people that are similar, and there's people that share commonalities, and there's people that share a similar outlook and perspective on life, right? And ideally, you want that in your closest relationships, right? And if life is a sort of series of concentric circles, the people that share the bullseye with you really should, you should be in harmony with how they see the world and what your goals are and your virtues. So there's harmony, right? Because being in relationship is sort of like being two suns in orbit around each other, you want that to be harmonious. So creativity uniqueness is very important to wood CFs, especially liver CFs. You know, that song by Frank Sinatra, I Did It My Way. Like that's a wood song, right? That's a liver, I did it my way, right? That's, you know, he talks about being, you know, obstacles and, right? So regrets, I have a few, but then again, too few to mention. Right? He's like, yeah, sure, I screwed up in the past, you know, but the perspective is okay, well, they're not that bad, right? They're in the minority, right? Too few to mention. Like I'm aware of them, but it's, in the larger scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal, right? All right, we could learn a lot from Frank. I used to hang out at this bar that had this big button that said, it was a picture of Frank Sinatra in his hat and tie and everything, and this big smile on his face, and it said, "It's Frank's world, we just live in it." I love that. So the liver is the general of the armed forces. Assessment of circumstances and conception of plans stem from it. So when you look at the official Gan, when the Chinese character for Gan, you see the flesh radical. So, okay, it's a piece of meat in your body, right? But then, excuse me, it's a body part, which is like a pestle, right? Do you guys know what a mortar and pestle is? So there's the bowl, and then there's that sort of oblong thing that you grind like herbs and stuff in, right? Right. You've got, I mean, this is sort of like, it was always considered to be like a metaphor for like conception. Like you've got this feminine yin bowl, you got this like male phallic looking like structure that like grinds, you know, something in there to create something new. Right? Right? It all comes down to sex, I guess, right? So but there's this pestle that grinds or destroy. It can either grind something into something usable, or it could destroy and oppose, right? So there's always this choice among wood CFs. Liver CFs especially are like out of balance. Like you're either with me or you're against me. You're either a friend or you're an enemy. There's no in between. And so that's a very immature way of looking at things, because a true friend is going to tell you when you're full of it. A true friend is going to tell you, like, anybody can be with you when you do everything right. A true friend is going to support you when you screwed up, right? It's not about, I agree with everything you do, I disagree with everything you do. You know, everything you do is great, everything you do is awful, right? Friend, enemy. You're like a real friend, like somebody who has real benevolence is going to say, man, that was stupid. Right? But they're going to be with you anyway, right? So in balance, you know, the liver official stands in front of something behind them to defend life. I don't know if any of you have seen any of the Lord of the Rings movies, but there's this character Gandalf, and I think it was in the second movie, they're in the subterranean series of like this sort of, I think it was like a dwelling place of the dwarves, and they come across this like immense demon, and he says to them, his party that he's with, you know, his hobbits and humans and one dwarf and one elf, he's like, this foe is beyond your abilities, run. Right? So he's having them run, and then he stands at the other end of this bridge, and he's got his big staff, and he stands there and he pounds his staff into the ground, and he says to the demon, you shall not pass, right? So he's presenting this aggressive front to defend the people behind him. It's not that he wants to like destroy this demon so to take away its right to exist. He's like saying, no, you stay there, you let my friends be, right? So in a way, he's not oppressing this, evil character. It's not about like destroying it. It's about defending his friends. And in a way, and this is why it's like paired with the pericardium. And the pericardium is all about loyalty. So you want you want your inner general to be loyal to your heart. You don't want a rogue general disconnected from your heart, right? Because these officials are always like sub-personalities, right? It's really important to look at them as like sub-personalities. Now, they may come into prominence with a person who's a wood CF or a liver CF, but the liver, when healthy, combined with the pericardium when healthy, is a loyal defender of those who they love, who they care for, who they have assessed and judged worthy of their chi and blood, right? So these are people that are really driven to stand up for the people who can't stand up for themselves, right? You could say like a defense attorney or an activist, like an animal rights activist or environmental rights activists, right? Or the Lorax. Do you guys remember Dr. Seuss? I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees, right? There was this company that wanted to cut down all the truffula trees, right? I was like a Dr. Seuss nut when I was a kid, right? So, but like, so you have this like really unimposing figure of the Lorax, like this sort of little goofy looking figure, but he's like indefatigable. I mean, he's willing to stand in front of these bulldozers, right? The person who's willing to stand up in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square, the people who are willing to walk across the Selma Bridge, right? The Indians who are willing to walk up to the British soldiers at the salt mines and get beaten, right? So you're willing to take a beating, you're willing to take the blows of life, you're willing to be the windscreen that takes the wind for the people behind you, right? One of the premier formulas is called Jade Windscreen, Yu Pingfang San, right? Jade Windscreen. Wind is the spearhead of 1,000 diseases, but you have something to shield you from the wind that's made of jade, which is also green and red, but right. So there's, at the time, jade was one of the strongest substances known to people, right? Maybe with the exception of obsidian. So you imagine being the defender of life that's strong, that's willing to take the external pathological factor, that's willing to take the wind, that's willing to take the blows of life. And again, blood infused with blood. Blood helps us to take the blows of life with comfort and grace. So these are people that are really willing to accept the challenge of confronting an oppressor and being in conflict and taking the beating for the sake of others, to make life more fair, to make life more equal. And in a way, to help the fire to transform and actually, when infused with benevolence, to reconcile with the oppressors. So if you look at like the ANC in South Africa, led by Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, what did they create? They created this commission. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where all the people who really like from de Klerk's government and were pro-apartheid, these oppressors, these abusers, they came forward, said, this is what I did. I played this part in the oppression of the, Black South Africans, and they were forgiven. But they had to come forward. So reconciliation And in a way, on a physical level, this is your body's repairing and remodeling phases, which is healing. So scar tissue is your body's, it's the sign of your body's forgiveness. It's the symbol and the representation of your body's forgiveness for you violating its perimeter, its territory, right? You cut yourself, you bleed, then you clot, then it repairs, then it remodels. That's forgiveness. And so on a psycho emotional level and a spirit level, a healthy liver cannot move forward without forgiveness. Self-forgiveness, oh my God, I can't believe I did that stupid thing. But I have to be able to assess it. I have to really look at it, assess it, reconcile, forgive, benevolence, move forward. Right? I have to be able to see, oh, yeah, at the time, the reason why I made this decision is because I was assessing the circumstances in this way. And based on my heart's, this was important to my heart at the moment. Oh, but actually I was disconnected from what was important to my heart. So I acted inappropriately. I extended beyond normal boundaries. I made a mistake. I oppressed myself or others. Now I must face it, right, and reconcile. So, this is going to be big themes in liver CF's life, because they want to be themselves. So it's like this sort of challenging dynamic between appropriate growth and appropriate waiting and patience. Wood CFs are like the most or least patient people you'll meet. Now, there's some people who couldn't give two sticks worth about growth, right? Water CF, I don't care if I grow. I just want to have enough power to have my resources. I don't growth, yeah, whatever, fine, sure. So they can be patient because it's not patience that they're activating. They're just being water. They'll sit there forever. That's a glacier, right? I move an inch a year. The glacier doesn't care about growth. The glacier just wants to exist. It doesn't care. But Wood CF wants to grow. So now patience becomes an issue. I'm growing too slow, or I become impatient, I grow too fast, and I become unstable. So these are some of the things that show up with the liver, and they want their plan enacted. So they could be bossy. They could be overly rigid. They could be antagonistic. They could be haughty. They could be aggressive, my way or the highway, right? Or they go deficient and then they become resigned. You can't fight City Hall. I don't have the blood and chi to affect the positive change in this world. I am overly flexible. I'm too resigned, right? I'm indecisive. I send my anger inward, empowered by self-judgment. And so I depress myself, right? These are the things that show up with a liver CF. And remember, all of them, whether excess or deficient, will take things very personally, very personally. There's no, oh, I was just kidding. No, you weren't. Right? And they take it where? To the pericardium. They take liver CFs, like they take things really to heart, right? Gallbladder, which we'll get to in a moment, we'll take a break and then we'll talk about gallbladder, moves outward. It's more outward facing, right? Liver CFs generally tend to do their thinking and planning quietly inside. Never let anyone know what you're thinking. Never let anyone know what you're planning. Never let anyone know what you're up to. Why? Because if I do, they could put obstacles in my path. If they know my plan, they can thwart my plan. Right? All right, let's take a brief break. Let's come back at 5 after. and then we'll talk about the gallbladder. Let's continue with the gallbladder. So the gallbladder is interesting. The gallbladder tan shows the flesh radical. And then there's a complicated character next to that, which can be understood in several ways, one of which is a sense of courage that is implied by a person standing on high ground, looking around, along with a mouth with words coming out, and projecting those words into a place that may be considered dangerous. So in a way, it's like, it's almost like the person carrying out the general's orders to the troops, which requires bravery, decisiveness, a sense of timing, a sense of judgment, right? So this is the official that's responsible for what is just and exact, right? And then determination and decision-making stem from it. So what is just and exact, so that implies precise or precision, right? It implies precision, but it also implies fairness, right? So things are precisely equal, precisely balanced, right? We think about the scales of justice, right? And justice is shown, at least in the United States. Does anybody remember the statue for justice? Like the symbol for justice, Lady Justice? What's interesting about how the Lady Justice appears? She's holding the scales. She's also holding books, which means this is based on some kind of established law or established agreements. But what else is interesting about Lady Justice?
Blindfold.
She's wearing a blindfold, right? Because to be blindfolded means I'm focused solely on the unity and not on my prejudgments, which I make with my eyes, right? So this is the official that takes the plans and implements them through decisiveness in a precise way where all things are in their proper balance, right? Like I don't want, like if I'm building a house, I don't want the frames to have like 8 2x4s on this side and 3 2x4s on that side holding up the frame of the house, right? That's not exact and that's unequal, right? Because we understand that implied in this is a goal that needs to be met, and therefore, by very nature of having a goal, you will have implied obstacles, and those obstacles have to be dealt with in a precise and just way. That's what is infused by benevolence, right? I can deliver my decisions, I can make my decisions, I can deliver my judgments in a way that is precise and balanced and just, right? And to speak that into the world, to stand for that, requires courage, because there's always going to be people that oppose that, because they're not going to be seeing things from a place of equitability or equanimity or equality or justice, right? They're like, it's my way or the highway, and you're in my way. So, you know, I mean, how many great movies, books, stories, plays, operas, or songs have been created around, you know, somebody going up against someone trying to oppress them, and standing up for something that's right, right? I mean, all great dramas have conflict. So the gallbladder is focused on reaching the goals and dealing with the obstacles and handling all the details and making all the decisions that get us there but it's always connected to the liver, right? So it's never going rogue, right? It's not gonna say, well, I'm not gonna pay attention to the architect's plans. I'm gonna go and, what, I really want like a solarium, so I'm just gonna build a solarium on the end of this. I'm not gonna wait for the permits. I don't care about if it fits in with the other plans. I'm going rogue. To hell with all of you. I just made the decision. I just made it. I just made the decision. I'm not connected to the general, and I'm not connected to the heart. Like, I don't care. Like, I just did it. I wanted to do it. Like, I would say that is generally like the voice of somebody who is under the influence of judgment altering substances like tequila. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Right? But on a healthy side, on a healthy presencing, a healthy gallbladder is decisive but not overbearing, is willing to take a stand but not just a position, right? To speak what needs to be spoken, even if it's going to hurt the feelings of other people. They give it to you straight, no chaser, but it's always infused with benevolence, and it's always connected to the liver, i.e. our higher purpose, that's connected to the heart, i.e. what's really resonant and harmonious with who we really are, not just about creating an image, right? A friend of mine, I don't know if I mentioned her to you in one class, but like, she was really like, she was very harsh in her judgments of other people when they made mistakes. And she kept her house like incredibly neat and clutter-free. Like, it was a little bit weird. Like, everything was just like, it was never, she never had a hair out of place, never had like dust or a book out of place or paper. It was completely organized, clutter-free. And then later on, we realized that she was just this functional alcoholic. So there's all this chaos and disorder inside, all these, stains, like this poor self-esteem, like she was like medicating herself with alcohol. And so she was sort of overcompensating by projecting her like hatred of the part of herself that was out of control by trying to control everything around her. And so like inside she was just like so disorganized and disorderly. So she outwardly projected that onto her surrounding environment and into the people in her life. She was very harsh in enforcing the rules and the thou shalt and thou shalt nots. It was really interesting. Then she eventually like came to terms with her alcoholism and got help and got through it. Now she's a recovering alcoholic and she's a lot healthier. But not until she started to become jaundiced and her liver started to fail. So change is hard. Like flexibility, the gallbladder in a really highly evolved way knows how to tack. Like, they go through life kind of like a sailboat. They adapt to the direction the wind is blowing. They don't change course, but they are willing to be flexible in their movements towards that goal. I had an acquaintance, I don't really see him much anymore, but I had a friend that was a pilot for British Airways, and he moved, so I don't really see him much. He now lives in Malta. But he told me that, when flying on transatlantic flights, he said something that blew my mind. He said, the plane is off course 97% of the time. I'm like, well, how the hell do you land in New York when you're flying from London? I mean, like, how does that work? If the plane is off course 97% of the time, like, how the hell do you get where you're going? Because, when you're in London, you can't see New York. I mean, it's not like walking across the street, if you like get off course, you're walking across the street, you can see where you're going, you can adapt. He's like, well, we have a computer that, you know, is constantly every 30 seconds or so adjusting our course. So you're only off course for maybe like a mile or 2 miles, and then you're back on course. And then the wind blows, and then you're off course for a couple miles, and then you're back on course. And the wind blows, and you're off course for a couple miles, and you're back on course. So it's this constant, like, little adjustments, right? Just like sailing, like you have to tack. You can't always just fly. I mean, sometimes you can sail pretty directly, but every now and then you have to, when the wind changes direction, we have to be flexible to adjust, but keeping our goal still in mind. And then being able to make the decision to alter course in the context of, oh, actually, it seems like I'm off course for a moment, but I'm actually being flexible to adapt to the changing circumstances so I can, you know, it's not always a straight line to my goal. I'm willing to move, I'm willing to be flexible, I'm willing to adjust. Someone says, oh, you know what, based on the traffic, if you're driving this way, you know what, maybe you take this other way. Like my wife's from California, and there's a really funny parody on SNL called The Californians. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's hilarious, especially if you know people from California. And if you're talking to someone from California long enough, they'll talk about the way they drove to get to where they are. They're like obsessed with finding the best route, the quickest route, or the easiest route from here to, what, you took the 405 to Van Buren and then you cut across to Oakdale? What are you, crazy? Right? I mean, that is such a Wood conversation. So the gallbladder can kind of get the whole picture and being willing to adjust course. Well, I like to go this way, but no, actually, that's not necessarily the best way to go right now. So this also applies to one's attitude, right? Well, my normal attitude to move through life is this way. Well, you know, maybe circumstances, the liver's assessing the circumstances. You know what, maybe actually you want to talk to this person this way to gain rapport, to achieve your goals. And then eventually, which brings you to fire, to create a sense of partnership and oneness again. Does this make sense? So the gallbladder is phenomenal at dealing with what's unpredictable. The gallbladder is great at being very young, externally oriented to, you know, use, again, water tonifies wood. So the gallbladder uses the resourcefulness of bladder, the cleverness of bladder, and the perseverance of the water and the your will to find clever, interesting ways to think outside the box, to see things in a unique way, to think of things, to think of strategies never thought of before, right?
Is your friend that is the recovering alcoholic, did she start to let her house kind of not be so perfectly clean and everything, or did that change? No.
No. but she wasn't so obsessed with it. Like she did it and enjoyed it, but she didn't like bust her ass and overdo it. You know what I mean? It wasn't a compulsion. It was just like, oh, I like my house clutter free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a really great question, right? Because people can overcompensate. They're like, oh, screw it. I'll clean tomorrow. And I mean, and she could do that, but so it wasn't like as perfect. Yeah. But it was like, it was very clean, but it wasn't like, there wasn't like this compulsiveness driving this unconscious, disowned need to overcompensate that was driving it now. But it is pretty, I mean, yeah, she still has a pretty clutter-free, she's down in South Carolina with her husband, but you go there and it's like, wow, this is really a clutter-free house, man. Because again, without clutter, you have freedom of movement, right? order and organization this is the irony, and all elements have irony, right? The irony with wood is actually the discipline and the organization and the structure actually make it easier to feel free. You could say, well, you know, like a healthy person would say, everything is a place for everything and everything in its place. Now, again, how do I do that? Am I doing it by this obsessive compulsion? And so I lose my temper every time something is out of place. Or do I go, oh, yeah, you know, it doesn't work to do it this way. Let's put this back in its place, right? You don't have to make someone wrong for it. You know, oh, you see it from their, oh, you know what? They were in a real big hurry and they didn't have time, but they were going to get to it later. Okay, I can forgive that. I have benevolence, right? So, you know, that's the cop that says, well, you were speeding or you ran the stop sign, but, you know, you go to the judge and they're like, I'm going to give you a break. Or the cop is like, you know, takes on the gallbladder judge role in that moment and says, I'm just going to give you a warning. Don't do it again. Right? They're benevolent, right? They're not like handcuffing you. You know, you don't want someone like, again, there's a lot of stories where people in authority are overstepping their bounds and they become violent and aggressive because they feel threatened, because they feel victimized, right? So, you know, again, it's not like they realized that the letter of the law, the stop sign, this red light was put here so other people can go and while you stop, but also for safety, right? That's moving towards the heart out of compassion, right? It's not like we want to control, like people are like, whoa, you know, they're making us wear masks because it's a power grab. I'm like, well, what power are they grabbing? They're not doing it because they want to control you. They're doing it because they don't want other people to be sick. Now, I'm not saying I'm all for mask mandates or whatever. I'm just looking at it from the cheap perspective of the officials of, you know, the wood and the fire, right? It's not a power grab. It's like they don't want people to be sick. So you have to restrain your freedoms of easy breathe movement by wearing a mask for the benefit of others. Because again, wood is constantly in balance, especially the gallbladder, in balance between the relationship between self and others, my plans, my goals versus your goals. So the healthy gallbladder will see that we have competing interests, but the unhealthy gallbladder will say it's a zero-sum game, and unless you lose, I don't win. And in order for me to win, you have to lose. And not only that, I'm gonna like gloat and dance around over your defeat. Like that's very unhealthy gallbladder. So the gallbladder, as part of the Shaoyang, is paired with the triple heater. The triple heater is very outwardly facing and allows us to take the physical and psycho-emotional temperature of our environment. So the gallbladder, more than the liver, is very acutely aware that in order to reach and achieve my goals, I have to be in appropriate relationship and harmonious relationship with others. That's why livers, they really are more likely to not really care so much about other people. Because they're just really focused more inward. They're more inward facing and they're looking to the heart. You know, they want to please the part of yourself that feels pleasure and feels happiness and feels authentic and joy from achieving the goal. But the gallbladder is like, well, wait, you know, actually we got these other folks involved here. I'm part of a community, even if it's a community of two, of which I'm one. And if I'm not in harmonious partnership with this other person, group, like if I go down to the county office and give that person a piece of my mind, are they going to be more likely to expedite my permit? No. They're like, that guy's a jerk, right? I'm disconnecting myself from my heartfelt emotional connections with others and my environment. You know, you could say, well, I'm going to build a 50-foot fence around my property. Is that going to really allow me to experience more harmony with my neighbors? Right? Or I'm gonna, you know what? Like my neighbor, they have kids, one of them's allergic to bees, but you know what? Screw them. I'm gonna have 5 beehives in my backyard because I can. It says in my permit charter, like I can do that. Well, okay, yeah, you can, Mr. 6-year-old. Right? And wood tends to be like, fire can be immature, but wood can be like really immature, like obnoxiously so, right? Because they're going to fight for their rights, and I don't give a crap about your rights, right? You come onto my property, I'll shoot you. Okay, you can, but is that going to really like help you achieve your goal, right? Well, that, you know, because again, an out of balance wood CF will defend it either that I'm right and I'm always right, or I'm never right. Other people are always right. I can't trust my judgment. I'm never right. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Right? So there's this quality of resignation. So the healthy gallbladder is someone who can really like get it done, right? Because they're willing to work with others and kind of Tom Sawyer like Tom Sawyer, he had to paint this big fence. So what did he do? He talked to his friends and made it look like this really desirable thing to be able to be a part of the fence painting people, like, so he Tom Sawyered it. Like he enrolled others, right? So so wood CFs can be like really great leaders because they're focusing their will and their power in a focused way towards a goal, but they enroll others in their vision. They don't create separation. They don't say, if you're not with my goal, you're bad and wrong. He's like saying, look how great this goal is. Look how fantastic this goal is. And these are people who are leaders of popular movements. These are charismatic corporate civic leaders. Steve Jobs on one hand was a jerk. I mean, he was tyrant, but he also had such an intense vision that he was able to really like attract a lot of people by his certainty, by his unreasonableness to bend reality to his will in service to a goal of a better future. Now, again, you can argue whether that vision is good or bad or best or not, but he was so obstinate in his stance. He didn't take a position, he took a stand, right? That's what makes a charismatic general that you want to follow, right? People say this is a great vision. And in politics, if you really want to look at it, I'm not talking about what's good or bad, but Hillary Clinton ran a terrible campaign. Her campaign slogan was like, I'm with her, or I'm not Donald Trump. And whether you like him or dislike him, I'm not pro or anti, but Trump had a vision for America. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it, you may agree with his tactics, you may disagree with his tactics, but anyone with a clear vision for the future, for moving forward, will always beat somebody who does not have a clear vision. Always. So do you have a clear vision for yourself in terms of who you are at the moment, at least, because we're always works in progress. And what's your vision for moving forward, right? When I'm in the treatment room, my vision is, and what I stand for is helping people free themselves from unnecessary suffering. That's my vision, that's my goal. Right? So I want you guys to think about your vision, your goals, right? And how clearly do you see them, and how closely do they align with your principles, and how harmoniously do they align with your actual nature? Because your nature may be different than what you want it to be, because you're not seeing the value of it. What you think are your flaws may be actually your greatest strengths. All right. Have a wonderful weekend. All the best. If you have any questions, just text or email me or call me. And enjoy this beautiful sunshine. Take care.
Thank you.
See ya. Thanks.